told this to Nicole, and she said, you know, I think exactly the same thing. And then we had that earthquake, and I was in my office. There were very few people in. You just shook like you wouldn't believe what's going on everywhere. And
wasn't it a big
and
flood
Nicole
too?
called me after, and he said, "Were you there?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Was it bad?" And I said, "Yes, it was terrifying."
You guys are too funny.
Morning, John.
How are you? Good to see you. You keeping well? Oh, that's wonderful.
In the back? I just because I'm always in trouble. So I would say it's stirring right there. Yeah. Because I imagine everybody's going to come up and see here.
Nice turnout, eh? Yeah, very nice. We've got just about everything in the house taken. That's what we want. I think in the order. Yeah, I don't know which way. I know I'm last. Imagine. Well, and that's my forte. Because I read the description when I get to the description. I go, okay, so and now aren't you? I said, she goes, and she just looked at me and laughed. She goes, yes, which is not even sympathetic, right? It's just sort of like St. Louis is just a screwball.
Yes, it is. I have to send an email. I've been really bad because I've been out of the country and then I got sick and then I'm just.
Oh, you got sick?
Oh, it was just a cold, but it was like a jet lag airplane cold, and it wiped me out.
Yeah. Okay. No, then we'll have to do a rush. I want to send an email around to some people, see if I can drum up some money from people as well. So, yeah. Okay. So maybe are you in your office this afternoon?
I am. I got a student coming to see me at 1:30, but that should be quick.
I teach from 1 to 2:30.
Oh, so 2:30 I'll be around. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay, good. Yeah, I want to see you anyway. Like, I feel like you disappeared.
What?
I was worried about you.
Oh,
but you were just having fun.
I was having fun.
That's
I went to New York on the weekend.
That's
Morning. How are you?
Okay.
Excellent, thank you.
Okay. Hi. Good, how are you? Hi. So it's going to be Jane first, then Dawn, then Joanne? Is that the order?
I'll give her a rant.
I was going to describe it.
I basically just I'm going to look at
You should see it because I found a red marker. So are you going to be on the phone? I got my phone right there. Okay.
We try to get away.
And you didn't have work yet. No one has homework or tests this week. Yeah, no, it's a nice little line though. Maybe I should choose that.
Because they know the children are also innocent and
I think we need to get going or get settled. Joanna's set up there. Yeah.
Okay, sorry, I just thought that was Madeline's and
We're sort of sitting randomly, but I don't think it matters. We're using this one. That's the one that's powerful.
So you're going first?
Yes.
No.
Right.
Welcome, mesdames et messieurs. The greatest show on earth by the great Porter, weighing in at 176 pounds. Genki Sudo! Anyone hear that? Yes? Alright then. Anyone heard of Genki Sudo? Nobody. Wow. Okay. Yeah, it's just the crosstalk that was kind of, I didn't crank it, but I can use an announcer voice to...
Well, on that note, on behalf of the 5 groups hosting today's lecture, and I'll ask group representatives to just wave so we can acknowledge them. The Greenberg Chair for Women and the Legal Profession, the Center for Law, Technology and Society, the Human Rights Research and Education Center, the Cavana LLP Professionalism Speaker Series, and the Center for Health Law Policy and Ethics. It's my pleasure to welcome you to today's talk, The Dalhousie Dentistry Scandal and the Legal Profession. What have we learned? Au nom des 5 groupes organisateurs, je vous souhaite la bienvenue à cette première conférence de la nouvelle année scolaire. On a nuts and bolts note, as you know, the session is accredited by the Law Society of Upper Canada for 1.5 hours of professionalism credit. We are just getting the agendas printed, so we'll make sure to get those to you at the end of the lecture. And we ask that you fill out the evaluation forms at the end too, which I will know the location of when we finish. I'd like to introduce today's chairperson. Dr. Teresa Scaza is a full professor at the Faculty of Common Law, the Canada Research Chair in Information Law, and a member of the Center for Law, Technology and Society. She's authored, co-authored, or co-edited many books on a variety of subjects, including trademark law, electronic commerce, extraterritorial jurisdiction, and interdisciplinary approaches to IP, to name a few. Current research projects include projects on trademarks and freedom of expression, intellectual property issues in citizen science, legal issues in digital cartography, and various issues related to open government and open data. She's also supported the creation of a blog about equality-related issues and sat on the board of a Girl Positive magazine. Without further ado, I'd like to pass the mic on to Dr. Teresa Scaza.
Thank you, Madeline, and thank you, everybody, for such a good turnout for this inaugural lecture. Today we have an impressive panel of speakers who will be addressing the topic, the Dalhousie Dentistry Scandal and the Legal Profession, What Have We Learned? As I'm sure you are aware, the so-called Dalhousie Dentistry Scandal arose when it was discovered that a group of male students had created a private Facebook group containing troubling and misogynistic content, some of which specifically targeted female classmates. The Facebook group had been created by these students in their first year of studies and was accessible only by invitation. It was in their 4th year that a member of the group shared some of the content with a female classmate who had been the subject of derogatory posts on the site. The woman complained to the university. News of the postings eventually became public and screenshots were leaked to the media. Public outcry was intense, not just because the content was offensive, but also because the group members were poised to join a privileged, self-regulating profession, one in which members of the public placed their trust. Avant la fin de l'année scolaire, les 13 hommes qui faisaient partie du groupe Facebook ont été suspendus de leur participation dans la clinique dentaire de l'université. Cette suspension mettait en question leur capacité de terminer leurs études. Éventuellement, tous les étudiants ont été permis par l'université de compléter leur formation. Cependant, leur capacité d'entrer dans la profession de dentiste demeure dans les mains des ordres de dentistes qui évalueront leur demande d'admission à la profession. De même qu'en droit, les ordres de dentistes ont une obligation de protéger le public. Notre panel aujourd'hui examinera les questions d'éthique professionnelle qui sont soulevées par ce scandale, mais ces questions seront situées dans le contexte de la profession juridique. Nos conférenciers se demanderont qu'est-ce que ça veut dire agir avec intégrité? What does it mean to act with integrity? Est-ce que ce type de groupe sur Facebook est entièrement privé? Are Facebook groups of this kind entirely private? Est-ce que ce genre de conduite constitue l'harcèlement sexuel? Is this type of conduct sexual harassment? Quelles devraient être les conséquences si des avocats ou des étudiants en droit s'engagent dans ce genre de conduite? What consequences should law students face if they were to engage in this type of conduct? Et quel genre de formation doit-on fournir dans les facultés de droit pour sensibiliser de futurs avocats à ces questions? And what type of training should law schools provide to sensitize future lawyers to these issues? The format of the panel today is to have each speaker speak for 10 to 15 minutes. Once each has spoken, we'll open the floor to what we hope will be a lively discussion. Each of our very accomplished speakers is a professor at the Common Law section of the Faculty of Law. In the interests of time, I will give only a very brief introduction to each, but I would encourage you to find and read their online bios on the faculty website. Professor Jane Bailey will lead off the discussion. She is the co-leader of both the eGirls and the new eQuality Project. Both are SSHRC-funded projects that explore legal issues relating to the online self-exposure of girls and young women. Sa recherche porte sur les questions de droit à l'égalité, de la liberté d'expression et du multiculturalisme, ainsi que sur les répercussions sociétales et culturelles de l'Internet. Le professeur Don McCrae est un ancien doyen de cette faculté de droit. Il est présentement titulaire du chair Hyman Solway du droit des affaires et du commerce, et il est bien connu comme expert en droit international. He was a member of the Task Force on Misogyny, Sexism, and Homophobia in Dalhousie University Faculty of Dentistry that was established by Dalhousie University in the wake of the dentistry scandal. La professeure Joanne St. Louis est experte en matière des droits à l'égalité, de la théorie critique des races et des théories féministes du droit. She's a bencher of the Law Society of Upper Canada and has a long track record of involvement both within and outside the legal profession in initiatives to examine and to correct systemic discrimination. So without further ado, I will turn the floor over to our first speaker, Professor Jane Bailey. Thank you.
Hi, everybody, and thank you all for coming. I feel like a bit of an interloper on this panel, but I want to sort of give you my thoughts. I call this documenting the locker room, an old story with a new twist. Question mark. What's old about this story? It's really, in many ways, a very tiring, exhausting story of intolerance and misogyny. All too familiar and exhausting. Sure, there's something new about it. There's something new about it in the sense that the poll on which female colleagues at the dentistry faculty, where the question was asked, which colleagues of yours in the dentistry faculty would you hate fuck, was on a social networking site. Along with jokes about chloroforming women and controlling them with the penis. But as the task force report prepared by Professor Backhouse and Professor McCrae, which I commend to you, so ably points out, there was a long history of non-technologically related, unless you define technology very broadly, to include the pen and chalk, for the writing of the misogynistic writing and the sexism and homophobic graffiti that was on the dental lounge walls for years before this incident, among a number of other incidents that are well documented in the report that really don't relate at all to technology. And even this new platform, if you wanted to think of this as a new platform, I suggest isn't really that significant in any way for the purposes of figuring out what do we need to do? What should we do? How should we handle this situation? As one of the posters in the Facebook book put it, locker room talk should stay in the locker room. In other words, misogynist comments were considered by some in this group, and I'm sure they're not alone, as par for the course, as guys being guys, as a way of letting off steam in a virtual locker room, in a semi-private virtual space. The story is also rooted in historic themes, tired, exhausting historic themes, in another way. What was subsequently said about one of the women who was targeted, the young woman who first complained, what happened to her isn't anything new at all in terms of, for those familiar with sexual violence. The task force report, again, very well documents the sense of isolation and victim blaming that she felt. She felt that she was being shunned for not being interested in or willing to educate her classmates. It documents the fact that some of her male colleagues refused to speak to her after finding out that she was the one who had reported what happened. She was also isolated by the university from her class in order to write her exams, rather than isolating the men accused from their class in writing their exams. So victim blaming, isolation, these are deeply rooted in sexual violence cases. It's just like the use of sexual violence as a tool to keep women quiet, to keep them out of public spaces, and especially out of male-dominated professions. So I promised you in the title there was a new twist. So what's new? Some, I think, point again to the fact that this was a Facebook page. And the terms of the Facebook page could be altered to only include members of a particular group. So it was a confined group of people in that sense. And so there was some issue of privacy arises. But what I want to suggest is that this is not a new issue that's introduced by technology. So just like in the physical locker room of old, there may be a sense of privacy within a group, or in a small conversation in the hall, or in a conversation in your living room, or at a party. But even in those cases, there is and has always been the risk of a leak beyond the boundaries of the physical space. The risk of the whistleblower. And here's where, so professional bodies then have always had to be prepared to address the question of when this kind of semi-private, if you will, information spills out into the public realm. How does it matter to the profession? What kinds of risks of harm does it present to the public that's meant to be served by that profession, and to others within the profession itself? How does it poison the atmosphere in the profession itself? What technology adds, I promise to get to the twist, is the cold, hard record. The black and white of the words, the corroboration, the documentation that we so often crave. We might say we're somewhat obsessed with in Western legal traditions, the evidence of the written record. So in this way, the technology that contributes to the documenting of the locker room, the conversion of what goes on in this virtual space into a cold, hard reality that becomes very difficult to refute, and also, in addition, extremely easy to distribute. Perhaps this produced something of a tipping point. So if nothing much is new, what to do? So, as I said, I felt like an interloper on this panel. My colleagues on this panel are far better placed than me to talk about professional regulation, how to respond to individual cases, and so forth. What I would like to focus on, and what I think, again, the task force report does an admirable job on, is the broader question. The question of the need for a cultural and social shift. We have blueprints for these. We have this task force report. We have a task force report that Professor Sheehy and others in this university worked on around sexual violence. Many other task force reports appearing across the country and internationally that provide blueprints for how to get started in thinking about what sort of institutional commitment is this going to take to turn the ship around. How do we undo rape culture? It's time to dust off the tomes. It's time to get committed. It's time to ask the institutions that have commissioned these task forces to acknowledge the commitments they've made, to report on what they're doing in order to advance the initiatives that have been recommended. Instead of scratching our heads and saying, what do we do? This is so complex, it's so complicated. We've had a blueprint. I actually, in my office, started to stack up the blueprints. If you want to come swing by my office, you can see the tome of books that I have sitting on my desk. I couldn't carry them down here, but I wanted to. We have blueprints. They go back many, many years around what needs to be done in order to make the cultural shift that needs to happen. The other thing I want to say, if we can imagine a future where sexual violence isn't a joke, it isn't a way of letting off steam. If we can imagine that, then we can start to think about how we're going to get there. And the universe and education is a component of that. But one of the things we have to do, I firmly believe, my research on the E-Girls Project has confirmed this for me. We don't wait till people are in dental school. We don't wait till they're in university. We don't wait till they're in law school. We don't wait till they're in high school. We start young. We start communicating ideas around respect for inclusion and diversity and equality and respect right out of the box. Day one, square one. And I highly recommend to you what I think of as a very modest attempt to make a step in this right direction that the Ministry of Education in Ontario has just developed. I strongly encourage those who are concerned around media reporting on what the content of those initiatives are to take a look at the curriculum, to take a look at what's posted online. Some of you actually might be, as I am, a little disappointed that it doesn't go quite far enough. So I leave you with this. Let's all make a commitment to this imaginary image I have. This idea that locker room talk, that letting off steam doesn't have to be about using sexual violence to control women's participation in the public sphere. It doesn't have to be about racist jokes, about controlling a multiplicity of groups' participation in the public sphere, and to commit to moving forward the agendas that many very learned task forces have set out for us. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for coming along and participating in this discussion. What I was going to do was give some background to what happened at Dalhousie, what the reaction was, what the response of the university was, and then suggest some of the things that the task force thought we could perhaps learn from that. And, of course, there was a lot in the media about it, but I think if you look at the task force report, it's not quite the same as what appeared in the media. But then perhaps I'll mention why that might be so, or why we don't know why it is so. What happened has already been mentioned by Professor Stasser and Professor Bailey. a group of male dental students started in first year a Facebook group, and they called it the Class of DDS 2015 Gentlemen. And pretty much every male student in that class had access to that. There were some students who didn't go on internet or didn't go on Facebook, did not participate, and some simply kept out of it. But most of the students who would see, many of the students did participate. This went on for 4 years, and students came in and came out. And then in December 2014, one of the members posted a poll. Who of the female members of your class would you like to hate fuck? Who of the female members of your class would you like to sport fuck? One of the members of the group, who was actually sitting working on his laptop with one of the women members beside him, made a comment to the woman student, said, I shouldn't show you this, and then she said, show me, and he showed her. He then allowed her to take screenshots of some of the Facebook posts, and a total of 54 screenshots were taken. 54 screenshots of what was essentially a 4-year period of Facebook posting. So we have no sense of whether or not that was representative, whether this is the sort of things they said, whether it was an isolated incident. The comments that were shown, mentioned by Professor Bailey, they were sexist, they were homophobic, they were about their classmates, they were about other students, about professors, about the dental school, and of a lot of it, and maybe this reflects my age, was simply puerile and juvenile comments that you might have been astounded that fourth-year dental students would say to each other. Right, one of the students who was identified, the one who got the screenshots, went to the university and wanted to make a complaint under the student conduct policy, which would result in discipline. The university preferred to treat it as a sexual harassment matter and wanted to use what they regarded as more appropriate, which was informal processes. And about that time, when they're still discussing this, someone, and no one knows who, because no one has yet taken responsibility or ever will, released some of the screenshots to the press. And if you remember back at that time, if you look at the press, there was essentially a frenzy, a firestorm. Social media, on Twitter, the press kept the story going for at least a month. The press hounded the students, hounded dental students, anyone they could find, arrived at their houses late at night, hounded their families late at night. It coincided with the CDC host Bemeshi. It was not long after what was known as the St. Mary's rape chant. A Twitter group called Dal Hates Women, hashtag Dal Hates Women, attracted all kinds of responses. And part of it, as Professor Bailey said, was a feeling that these are professional students. Is this what's happening in the dental profession? What was the university community's reaction to it, outside of the administration? Well, there was a feeling amongst many people that this is the same old thing at Dalhousie, and the university will sweep it under the rug the way they sweep everything under the rug. And there was another version amongst the Dalhousie community, and that is, this is a story about an attack on white women. There have been many racist attacks at Dalhousie that have been ignored. There have been many homophobic attacks that have been ignored. Why is the university responding in such a way to this particular issue? So there were a variety of views being expressed, and there was a diversity, again, as Professor Brady mentioned, as to those who regarded this as a trivial example of locker room talk, those who regarded it as kind of epitomizing what is happening in society, and who knows what these men were doing outside of Facebook. If they're saying that sort of thing on Facebook, who knows what they're doing? So it was a reaction of rape culture. What did the university do? Well, they eventually identified 13 men who are on Facebook. We don't know whether others came in and came out, because this Facebook post was taken down shortly after the complaint was made to the university. So it all disappeared. And 9 women were identified as being targets of these of the university was keen on, and a faculty member of the law school took responsibility for a restorative justice program, which involved meeting with the students involved and trying to educate, understand, rehabilitate. And this was the preference of a number of the women who were identified in the Facebook poll. And I think you have to understand a little bit about what dentistry is like. For 2 years of dentistry, the second 2 years of dentistry at Dalhousie, you're in a clinic. You're working close together. Not just study groups as we're familiar with in law school. You're working in the clinic, men and women together all the time. They knew each other. And some of the women said, you know, we have no sympathy whatsoever for what was said. We deplore it completely, but we'd rather educate these men and have them graduate as better people, perhaps, and understand what they did and the harm that they caused. Not everyone took that view. In the end, and the restorative justice was opened up to any student in the dentistry class. And in the end, 15 men, 12 of whom had been on Facebook, but the others had not, and 14 women, 6 of whom had been identified in the polls, were part of the restorative justice group. Neither the student who brought the complaint nor the male student who's on Facebook who showed her the posts was part of that. All right, the restorative justice eventually produced a report. They spent 150 hours in group work, and the report, if you look at it, is innovative, educational, rehabilitative. I'll come back and talk about that in shortly. At the same time as the restorative, I should put a little bit more context to restorative justice. In Nova Scotia at that time, there had been a suspension of restorative justice for sexual assault matters. And therefore it became quite controversial as to using it here. I mean, how do you characterize those posts? Are they sexual assault? Are they sexual harassment? There's a great debate about that. But many people felt it was inappropriate to use restorative justice for this kind of problem. At the same time, a process was launched in the dental school. The dental assistant dean in the clinic suspended the males who were involved from the clinic and made them take their classes remotely. A lot of controversy over that, but it was supported by what is called the ASCC, the Academic Standards Class Committee, which is a group of faculty. And they then said, we'll monitor the students' behavior, we'll keep them out of the clinic, we'll also see what happens in the restorative justice process in deciding whether to let them back in and whether they can graduate. The male student who was on Facebook, often referred to as the whistleblower, or he really wasn't the whistleblower, but that's the way the press referred to him. The woman was the whistleblower, not him. He did not take part in restorative justice, and so the Academic Standards Committee had a hearing, found that he committed misconduct, and set up some disciplinary actions for him. Eventually, the students, after completing the restorative justice, were allowed to go back into the clinic and able to graduate, and the result, of course, was that they were able to graduate after going through restorative justice. The woman who made the complaint didn't get any response to the complaint because there was no student conduct complaint. And the male student who showed the screenshots got disciplinary action, although he eventually graduated. That's that's the background to it. The university set up this task force. 3 individuals we mentioned before. We interviewed 150 people. One of the things we meant to look at was the dental school culture. And the dental school culture is different. It's been there a long time. But in the clinic, it was highly competitive, and it was common for sexist, racist remarks to be made. There was a great distinction between dental students and dental hygiene students, who are largely women, dental students about mixed 50-50 men and women. The staff we discovered in the dental school were badly mistreated by faculty. They were examples of things. Staff members, if they wanted to go to the washroom, had to leave a little sign on their desk. The staff member that left her desk, and they were practically all women, was called to account. Why have you left your desk? That kind of Dickensian sort of behavior. And then there was the wall that was mentioned by Professor Bailey. Behind the bar in the student lounge, there had been a wall where people wrote graffiti, largely sexually oriented, and as the report points out, obsessed with male genitalia, but homophobic, sexist, misogynist. That had gone on for a good number of years. It had never been painted over. Faculty, when we talked to them, said, I don't know about that, or I've never seen it, or I don't go to the student lounge, so I would never have seen it. But no one said it was appalling, which it really was, that it could go on for so long. Shortly after we were shown it, they painted it over. They said it was an important thing for the alumni to come back and see. The kind of thing that was in Facebook was on those walls. On the Facebook sites were on those walls. The dental profession reacted. Licensing authorities said they would be looking at these things, and then eventually did create some, I thought, rather weak conclusions based on dealing with the Dalhousie Facebook incident rather than looking at the whole thing from a more general perspective. Okay, what can we learn? I've got 1.5 minutes, so I'll speak very quickly. We're not going to change Facebook. It's going to exist. It's used in classes. People say, well, we shouldn't be using it, but it's always going to be used. And Facebook's not private. Someone will leak it. Gender-based Facebook groups are potentially problematic, which is what we saw. You put a group of men together, and they start to, some bravado enters, and they go worse than each other. The women had their Facebook group, which they closed down, and some of them said, it was all minor, we talked about recipes, and others said, we closed it down because we didn't want anyone to see the sorts of things we were saying. So gender-based groups have a problem. What has to be done is to make clear that Facebook, things like that, are not private, covered by university policies, make it clear. Facebook was the medium, it wasn't the cause. The views that are expressed in those Facebook posts are found on the internet all the time. In fact, there was nothing original in the Facebook posts. Everything they put on those posts, they derived from somewhere else on the internet. So we're not talking about Dalhousie students or dental students. We're talking about a much more pervasive social problem that exists. Pornographication, it was a symbol of a wider problem. Pornographication, homophobia, race. Facebook disclosure meant it became public. That was all. What about the university responses? Well, generally the universities have good policies, and that was what we found about Dalhousie. The policies are good. But how do you administer them? And that's where the problems come in. What happens is that lawyers get involved, university lawyers, administrators. One might think in the abstract, what should the university do? First of all, protect the complainant. Secondly, make sure they don't infringe the rights of the person who's accused. And thirdly, they should look to ensure that the university's reputation is not being threatened. It turns the other way around. First thing they look at is the university's reputation. Second thing they look at is the rights of the accused, and lawyers are as much to blame for this as anyone. And lastly, they consider protecting the complainant. The language at Dalhousie was quite instructive. In the beginning, they said we want to protect the complainant. At the end, they talked about the rights of the people accused. Restorative justice, and I can't go into this, there's a lot more detail in the report that we should look at. Restorative justice was highly successful, but still controversial. It was controversial because it's not clear that the men went in there fully consenting. If they went through restorative justice, they didn't get disciplined. So is that full consent? Did the women really consent to going in? And the restorative justice process produced an investigation, which wasn't part of its mandate. Finally, the issue that was raised by Professor Bailey, culture change. Essentially, you can't say that this is all a product of the dental school culture, but it's quite clear that the dental school culture affected those students and affected what they said about it. Many of the things they said related back to jealousy, for example, of women who they believed were getting preferential treatment by instructors in the clinic. The flip side of that was that women were horrified that some of the clinic instructors wanted to spend time with them, wanted to keep spending time with them. They wanted to get these creeps away from them. But it was perceived differently by others. How do you change that kind of culture? We had a meeting with the Dalhousie Dental School, both the administrators and then with the full faculty. That is, faculty, students, anyone came, and it was difficult. Of course, they wanted to blame us for writing the report. They were angry with each other. But the challenge for them is to, and this is something we want to think about in terms of law schools as well, the challenge for them is how do you change the institution? The dean can't do it alone. Students can't do it alone. Faculty can't do it alone. The staff are the least empowered and therefore can't do it alone. So there has to be some kind of collective attitude, of which education is part in the university, to change it. But people have to change their minds, change their thinking about it. Thank you. I'm sorry I've exceeded my time.
Hi. You're all very attentive. It's just, it's the type of topic that is, deeply painful for all of us to think about it. If we're thinking about it from the perspective of ourselves as lawyers, as law professors, as law students, and just as members of the public, it's a really shameful thing to think about our colleagues and friends who we might know who are in these programs, and to also think about ourselves knowing anybody who might engage in this kind of behavior. It's a really difficult topic. I'm sure all of you, when you read it, were just as shocked as I was. And the shocking part is very much what Professor Bailey has said. It isn't the newness of it, it was just how blatant it was. It's sort of all of us wanting to think that we've transcended that moment, that we're in 2015, we're more sophisticated, we're more humane. We're basically, as professionals, leaders, and models. What I'm going to talk to you about is about the Law Society. But I'm actually not going to talk about the Law Society. I'm going to talk about who all of us are in this room, what we're part of, and what it means to be a professional. Because that's what the Law Society Code of Professional Conduct is attempting to do. In many ways, through the various rules, we're trying to articulate what is the behavior that we expect. Now, the Law Society regulates in the public interest. Now, when you talk to members of the practicing bar from time to time, they get very frustrated with the Law Society because they make the mistake of thinking that our job is to regulate in the members' interest, because, of course, what we do is based on the money we receive from all of the members. But, in fact, our capacity to be self-regulating, in other words, to determine who becomes a member of our profession, what standards they keep, what we do when they transgress in a variety of ways, and how they exit, is dependent not on whether we win a popular vote with our members, but whether we protect the public, whether we serve the public. So at the heart of why we would have to pay attention to any sort of similar behavior on the part of law students is because how can an individual who engages in that kind of behavior serve the public? What kind of lawyer are they going to be? Think of what solicitor-client privilege is and the nature of the work we do. They are going to be in a private setting with a client, holding these kinds of attitudes. They're going to be supervising women in a law firm. They're going to be working on a legal team with counsel from the other side. They're going to be mediating a dispute. There's a range of ways where this behavior might be considered indicative of what I would call, not sexual harassment, pure and simple incompetence. It's incompetence. Because if you cannot actually respond in a way where you have internalized the principles of human rights, you're not fit to practice. Now, that's my personal view, and I'm not claiming that there is a specific part of the Code of Professional Conduct. I've worked on parts of it, and it's not quite as sharp-edged as I would have it. Because I think that there is a problem here. And we do need to spend way more time focusing on how we deal with those kinds of behaviors. Now, one of the things you have to understand is it doesn't wait for you to become a lawyer to do it. What you're seeing out of the dental scandal is the issue of how you enter. It's a privilege to enter the profession. So you can be subject to a good character hearing. So you take that issue, transpose it to here, and that same woman student would be in a position to write to the Law Society. Regardless of whatever the outcome, regardless of distorted justice, it wouldn't affect any of those people. Anybody could write and say, we have concerns about the fitness of this person to enter the legal profession. There are two categories. We talk about professional misconduct a lot because you think about, am I being a good lawyer? But conduct unbecoming is also a ground that brings you in front of our disciplinary process. And that has to do with behaviors that are not tied specifically to your legal work, but to the manner in which you have conducted yourself. It can be simply something like racking up masses of parking tickets that you never pay for. Why would that matter? Because how can you be a lawyer if you have a disrespect for the legal process? So we care about that. It has been on occasion, you want to talk about private matters, people in private relationships, but you're abusive in your relationship. Those kinds of things sometimes are raised in that context, and we will look at them. So you can see right away this notion, leave aside Facebook for the moment, of what is private and separate behavior is not private and separate behavior at all. Having the license is a privilege. I think the most damning thing about this entire piece was the idea that because you say you're sorry, you might be able, without any disruption in the course of your education, without any fine, because if you disrupt somebody's education, they have financial hardship. They have to pay another year's tuition. They have to be